trunk, I open up, I sold my soul a good price.
Welcome to the Nerd Talk podcast by thedigitalworm.com. I'm your host, Matt. I'm here with my buddy, Jon. Jon, if you could say hello to everybody.
Hey guys, what's happening?
So we took off last week for the holiday. It was one of those things, but we're ready to get started doing what we do, which is taking the 10 most interesting things that we found on the internet that have to do with nerd culture over the last week, or in this case, the last 2 weeks, and we discuss them at length. And first up on the docket today is we are going to talk about this article I found on Screen Rant. And as always, I will include links to these original pieces of content that I find with the YouTube video and on the website. They said Loki has become the Thor franchise's Magneto. Now, I personally don't really like this comparison. In the MCU, Loki is his own guy. He's not a bad person per se. He just has ideas on what he wants to do. He's kind of selfish, but that's fine. Stan Lee was known for taking characters and giving them like very real, very human flaws and quirks. And I think Loki, they've done a great job of giving Loki the full Stan Lee treatment. He doesn't have the black and the white of good guy versus bad guy kind of treatment. He's kind of is wherever he is, and wherever that is wherever he feels like being at that time. And I love it. Loki is one of my favorite characters in the MCU. And they compare him to Magneto. And yes, like Magneto is kind of the same way, but Magneto also is not a bad guy. Magneto has never truly been an evil man. He doesn't want equality. He thinks mutants are better, but at the same time, mutants are getting some pretty shitty treatment in the X-Men series. Jon, you know a lot more than I do about the X-Men series and all of the treatments that mutants received, and honestly, it's kind of scary how much that mirrors what we see in real life. As far as how the status quo kind of reacts to people who are different, who look different, who have different views on things, etc. I'm going to go ahead and let you throw out your opinion on this.
Well, there's really a whole lot to unpack in this article, and Screen Rant is one of those kind of large brush media web magazines where they'll give you an idea of something and go with it, and then they move on to their next thing. And so base level of the Magneto versus Loki as characters go, this is written by people who don't read comics, generally for people who don't read comics. So this whole idea of they're used to action movies. In an action movie, a bad guy's a bad guy and a good guy is a good guy. Now, that's just almost never not true. So they're looking through a lens of action films. They're not looking through a lens of comic books. A comic book, another way to look at it would be maybe where these large wills supremacy all the time. And so you've got Magneto, who originally was portrayed as a villain, as kind of a foil to the X-Men, someone who also had powers but had a different way of looking at it. But the X-Men originally, to the civil rights conflict, it was a way for them, a bunch of predominantly Jewish white men in New York, to have a national stage to talk about the things that were happening all throughout the continent, of people of color being trampled on all the time without going out and visibly saying it, and maybe getting censored by someone and then being taken out of business. So that's kind of the underpinnings of all of the stuff for the mutants part of the Marvel Universe. But the idea within comic books overall, going from being an antagonist to a protagonist, is almost as old as comic books just within the characters that are in the Avengers film, the Black Widow was a Russian assassin that was won over by the Avengers and became a good guy, but originally was not a good guy. The Vision was created to kill the Avengers. Guy either. He was also a villain. He's won over by the attitude and the ideas of the folks in the Avengers. So just within the characters that became the cinematic universe Avengers started out as villains. And it's easy to miss that if you're not from that. The rest of Marvel Comics, there's a book called The Thunderbolts. The entire premise of the book was a former Nazi, Baron Zemo, group of supervillains disguised themselves as heroes and ended up becoming heroes through doing the things they were doing. And this is from the 90s. This is 20 years ago. X-Men also used to be a villain. Rogue of the X-Men used to be a villain. Most of these characters start out with these motives, and it morphs, and that's part of the growth of characters through comic books.
Right, and that's one of the things I love about Marvel is the character growth, and I think overall, like you've talked about how in some of the Marvel shows, specifically Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., like how much character development there is, and that's a huge thing for both of us, because we're both really into characters and character development. And it's as much a part of the entire story as the story itself. Like I want to see how this character goes from point A to point B. Like I don't care about the beginning and the end. I care about the journey.
Right, and a culture of people who is just accustomed to an action film, everything being encapsulated in 92 minutes. It's going to be a little more difficult for them to grasp their that thought process. If they weren't, then we wouldn't still have all these Marvel and DC films coming out. But it is a matter of kind of culture adjusting to the form of storytelling.
How do you feel personally? Like I said, I'm a huge fan of Loki. Are you a big fan of Loki, and are you a big fan of Magneto? I know I've personally loved. I think they've done a great job of casting both Loki and Magneto for the original X-Men, as well as the more recent adaptations. What's his name? Michael Fassbender? I think that's his name. I think he's done a pretty good job.
Casting decisions on Magneto have been spot on. Same with Charles Xavier. Actually, I think that they could not have done much better than either of those characters. As far as Loki goes, to be really honest with you, as far as with the comics and such, I've never really much cared for Thor. It's just not my thing. Loki, much more interesting in Greek mythology to me than he is within the realm of comic books. I kind of have always felt like those characters have been
played out.
No, kind of more a foil in the background for larger characters.
That's fair.
Like, not everyone can be the star. Those secondary characters, and to me, that's where Thor kind of goes through in the comics. Now, as far as in the films, guys have made me like Thor as a character, as a film character, which is kind of, I never expected that to be a thing. The only reason why I bothered to watch the first Thor film, honestly, is because it was directed by Kenneth Branagh, who is basically the world's best Shakespeare director. It has been for about 40 years now. The guy's amazing. And I thought to myself, I don't really care about this character, but if there's anyone that can do it, if there's anyone that can turn what I consider to be a B-list character into something that's interesting, it's going to be the guy that turns Shakespeare alive. And it does feel a little Shakespearean throughout that first film. It's got that theatrical aspect to it. It doesn't hurt. The supporting cast is just ridiculously stacked. But that's what it took for me to really like that character.
I felt
And
like I felt like Thor didn't really shine until the third movie, to be honest.
the third movie was a great buddy cop film.
Yeah, that's
What it
kind of what
needed
I liked about it, to be honest.
was a great buddy cop film. It took a lot of cues from the things that the first Guardians of the Galaxy did correctly, and then formed it to fit the characters that they had. A lot of the Easter eggs throughout that film I enjoyed a whole lot. The gigantic statue of Beta Ray Bill was really cool. There's a lot more, but it was I thought very well done.
Agreed. So Boise, Idaho is turning sewage into beer and cider. What they're doing is they're treating the water, making it clean again, and selling it to breweries and cider companies. And it seems like quite a few of these breweries are getting on board with this idea, and apparently it's selling pretty well too. John, what do you think about drinking beer that has been created using treated sewage?
Well, if you go to your kitchen sink, you turn on the faucet, you put a glass under it, and you drink that water, you're drinking water that's treated sewage too. There's nothing unless you live in the country and you have your own well and you dug your own well and you know where the water comes from, you're drinking something that used to be pee.
That sounds delicious.
That's just what it is. The world is a gigantic recycling machine, and we've had to take our own steps to become part of that, and that's why we have water processing plants. Now, to be fair, I have a filter on my own kitchen sink. I got an extra step. I don't know how much good it does, but it helps my brain. But I think that this is a great step, and I think that more breweries should do this. Looking into it, they're using a five-step process, most of which is done by the actual municipality. The last two steps are done by the breweries themselves, which is an unnamed step, which filtration, I don't know, and also reverse osmosis, which I don't believe any municipality uses reverse osmosis because it's a little on the expensive side. That's where you turn the water into steam, the steam falls back into being water, and there's an extra step of purification that comes with that. And also, if you're brewing beer, you do have to take extra steps to make your water super clean because you have to start from basically nothing. The fact that they're outsourcing the last part of this to the breweries themselves, I don't know how much it's helping the costs for Boise, but it can't hurt. As I saw that link, I thought maybe there was a Mormon joke in there somewhere, but apparently it's a real thing. I would totally drink beer that was directly produced by these people. It's probably pretty good.
I think it's definitely an interesting idea. I feel like as our climate continues to change, we really need to start thinking more outside of the box here. And craft beer, it's not going anywhere. Like a lot of people are like, the whole craft beer thing is a fad, and that when it first came out anyway, and now it's it's really clear that craft breweries rather is here to stay. And I think these kind of ideas are really interesting, and I'm curious as to how good this beer is. But yeah, I believe you're right. I mean, a 5-step process. They're going through a lot more steps than other breweries are to make sure this water is clean and pure and everything. And yeah, I want to check it out.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, if this podcast happens to get into the hands of the Boise, Idaho brewers that are doing this, happy to take some of that off your hands, guys, at Barbarian Brewery, Cider Company, Lost Grove Brewing, or Mad Swede Brewing. That's a sweet name too.
I think I've heard of that actually. Mad Swede. I want to say I saw some of it, maybe at the Barrel Chest over off Electric Road. I don't know if
Maybe so.
Are you familiar with that store at all?
No, it exists.
I've been in there a couple of times, and I've been pretty impressed with their selection. I don't know. I have to talk to. I got one of my buddies is a craft beer nerd, so I'm gonna have to run some of these breweries through him to see if he's tried any of them. You know, the thing that's most interesting to me is that Boise, which I didn't really know, but apparently Boise is pretty much a kind of a desert landscape.
Well, yeah, man. I mean, basically, if you're below and west of Oklahoma, and everything is desert out there. This is not a place where really it's easy for people to live. All of those large cities out west have precarious water situations. Just look at Los Angeles. They've been on fire for about a month now. Los Angeles only exists because they rerouted a river to where Los Angeles is, and it's just so precarious that they can just never keep it okay.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't. I'm going to be honest. I've lived most of my life in the South, and that's probably mostly where I'm always going to live. It's just home, I guess. You know, Virginia, North Carolina, those kind of areas where there's mountains and there's trees and there's water. Like, for people who've lived their entire lives in our area, you don't think of, you think of Arizona and Nevada as a desert, but you definitely don't think of Idaho and that area as a desert. So this is just another way for this, what is essentially a desert community, to be able to make the most out of their water situation.
Absolutely, and good on them for that.
Yeah, I'm like, at first, when I first read the article, I was like, I don't know, and then the more I thought about it, the more I was like, all right, that's pretty cool. All right, this one I really like the story a lot. This luxury resort in Bali has banned gadgets from their swimming pool area. Now, I'm sure John, because he likes to be thorough, checked out this resort, and I checked out this resort, and it's essentially paradise. And if I was at a place like this, I would be very tempted to smack a device out of somebody's hand if I saw them on it. The resort is the Ayana Resort and Spa, and I highly recommend checking this place out. It looks like just absolute paradise. It's gorgeous, and the fact that they're removing devices from the most beautiful area of the resort, I think, is, they get a big thumbs up from me for that. I mean, you don't go to these areas to hang out on your tablet and your phone all day. You go there to relax and enjoy the fact that you are living in paradise, and you can kind of take a little time to forget about all the garbage that's going on in the outside world. John, do you have any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I've got a little bit of a different take on the whole culture of this, to be really honest with you. I mean, when it comes down to me, the person that I am, I do find it a little hard to really care what's going on in a luxury spa. I'm that I'm dirt poor, but I'm not by any means an affluent person. I have a job just like anybody else who's likely to be listening to this. I do my stuff. I enjoy. There's things that I do to enjoy myself, but you're never going to see me in some Bali spa. I say eat the rich. That's what I say. That's where I am on luxury spas in general. They can eat their phones for all I care.
That's fair. I just think that, every time I go to a bar or I go out to a restaurant with my friends, I feel like they spend half their time on the phone, or I look around and half the patrons in the area are on their phones or a tablet or something, rather than spending quality time with the people they care about. And it just seems ridiculous.
I 100% agree with you there. That's why I like the cell phone game. Everybody puts their cell phone in the middle of the table at the bar. First person who looks for a text message or looks for a call buys the next round for everybody. I think that's a pretty good equalizer on getting people out of their own heads and into the conversation. And typically gets me free shots because more often than not, my phone's pretty close to dead.
Well, here's the thing with my phone is I just hardly ever look at it. Like, I just don't care.
You'd be pretty set too.
Oh, yeah, but I know for a fact none of my friends would play that game with me because they're not that dumb. Like,
Fair enough. Fair enough.
like I have no problem. I could just throw my phone out the window right now, and I just wouldn't even care. I'm not like I work from home, so I don't really need a phone. And nobody really talks to me all that often, and most of the people who do talk to me know that, the fastest way to get into contact with me is probably through email or some sort of instant messaging service or something like that. Like if you call my phone, there's a good chance I'm not going to answer, and that's because I do not like talking on the phone. I do not like looking at my phone. I think this phone culture that we have now is absurd, and it gets on my nerves. My god kids are always, well, the oldest god kid. Actually, no, both god kids. The 11-year-old as well as the 1.5-year-old love phones and love technology, and sometimes I just want to smack it out of their little hands. This one kind of bothers me, and I'm you're usually the type of guy that has quite a bit to say on this one. Um, Reports of the first genetically enhanced babies spark outrage. I found this on Gizmodo, and apparently this in China, the scientist altered the DNA of these twin babies while they were still in the womb to prevent them from contracting HIV. Uh, this has got a lot of people in an uproar. I can't say I disagree. I personally think genetically modified people is going to be a turn for the worse as far as humanity goes. It feels like a step in the wrong direction. John, what do you think?
Well, I mean, genetically enhances kind of it's a little bit of a heavy-handed term, and I understand why they use that as the title for the article, is to get people to click in, because when most people who are into nerd culture, into any of this, they see the word genetically enhanced. What they think is, well, maybe I could be stronger, maybe I could be faster, maybe I could turn my eyes purple, something like that, or more likely do that for my kids or my kids' kids. But realistically, it's both more complicated and simpler than that. So what this dude did, is Dr. He in China, a gene editor, which those are legal here in the States. There's multiple hospitals and research facilities throughout the United States that have these. We just don't use them on embryos that become viable fetuses. Destroy the embryo, he turned it into fetus, ended up being twins, and he took the experiment further than most people are currently willing to do it.
Yeah, but
and he changed one piece of one gene, potentially give an immunity to HIV. And I think that the place the guy is coming from, and I think that he understands something that is hard for people who aren't in biology, and is the steps that we take as a scientific community to go through these types of things. Follow the rules, quote unquote ethical, and whether you agree with that, it might be a different conversation. It could be 3 generations from now before someone tried what he tried. Out of the silence of things that you're not hearing, that he would like to see HIV gone within his lifetime. Now, I don't know what the rate of AIDS is in China. I'm assuming it's probably pretty high, because they don't have a whole lot of protections over there for health. That's why they have smog warnings in most of their large cities all the time. They just don't have those protections in place. Probably he thinks, I want to see the world better within my lifetime. Now, in the United States, he'd be prosecuted. He'd be on his way to prison, most likely, because he skipped all those guidelines. There are countries where those kids would be euthanized. Not here. That wouldn't happen here. But there are places that would happen. Should not happen in China, I don't believe. if we keep it on the level of eradicating the potential for disease, quote, genetic enhancement is a very, very good thing. As long as you don't genetics, I think it's fine.
I'm one of those people who are on the fence. I think this guy's intentions were extremely noble. And I definitely like where his heart and his head are. But I think there's also a potential to see some real negatives coming out of this. I think potentially it could be pretty scary if people start using this kind of science for the wrong reasons. And I mean, I hate to sound like such a negative Nancy, but this kind of science usually gets into the hands of people that it shouldn't be in the hands of. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, I think that we're trained by culture and by our subcultures. That's going to go. You know, everyone assumes style scenario where, you know, the rich genetically alter and modify their successors to be faster and stronger and smarter, where the standard person, you know, gets worse and worse. Like we especially here in the States, and I think probably England as well, they share a lot of our paranoias. If as long as it's kept on a medical level, as long as it's kept on a level of eradicating diseases and defects, I do think that this will be a good thing. Now,
on that we agree. Like, as much as
is the time frame, because we don't have the technology simulations good enough to know what the future is going to hold for this stuff. So all we can do is things in real time. All we can do is things as we can, see how it goes, and then the next generation can make better decisions, or 5 years from now make better decisions. So the reason I think that the scientific community as a whole does not want to make these steps is because the potential one that's genetically wrong and has a short but very, very painful life. Nobody, you know, these people are all doing this because they want to help humanity. Yeah, sure, I'm sure that they want to get paid. Everyone wants to get paid, but in general, I mean, there's lots of ways to get paid that don't involve science and, you know, trying to make people better. Those people don't get into this for that. So with the purpose being healing and not hurting, the possibility of creating a human that lives a short and excruciating and painful life is a heavy burden.
No, I mean, I definitely agree with you there. Like, when this kind of process is used to make humanity better in a lot of ways, like, you know, I mean, you think about all the kids that are born with defects and variety of handicaps and the extremely challenging life that lies ahead of them. Like, you definitely wish that something like this could have helped. Because, you know, I think, you know, if a kid is born, then, you know, they deserve a chance to live the happiest life possible. I'm so much of a science fiction nerd, it's ridiculous. Do you remember that movie Gattaca?
Yeah, definitely.
Like,
Ethan Hawke.
Yes. That's kind of what concerns me a little bit, is like, you know, getting to the point where if you're not enhanced, you can't get a job, and you can't, you know, you essentially fall into this caste system of enhanced versus non-enhanced. Like, that's the part that kind of freaks me out a little bit. Being able to eliminate certain defects on a genetic level while before the baby's even quote unquote a baby, you know, while it's still an embryo. Like, that kind of science could make a massive change, like a positive change for humanity. So I think for the time being, I'm still going to be on the fence about it. Not really sure, but I do like the points that you brought up. So Fortnite now has over 200 million players. I think this is great, and I think this is terrible all at the same time. I'm glad that so many people who are not quote unquote gamers have found a game that they enjoy, and people are playing it all over the world and having a great time. I personally do not play Fortnite, but I do like the idea of having that game that so many millions of people can get together and enjoy together. However, it's bad because I know there's a lot of stuff happening in school systems where kids are finding ways to be sneaky, and some are just outright playing it out in the open. And I read an article where this teacher threatened a kid with lowering his grade if he didn't get off his phone and stop playing Fortnite, and the kid didn't want to leave the match, so he just accepted a lower grade. Like, I've never played Fortnite, but apparently the game must be incredible if children are sacrificing their grades to be able to play. John, what do you think about this many millions of people playing this game?
Well, I mean, I think that number is a little deceptive. This means that 200 accounts have been generated. Now, I'm not assuming. I know plenty of people who downloaded that game, checked it out for a little while, realized it was not for them, and then took it off their phone or their computer or their gaming system and never thought about it again. Now, those accounts still exist. They're sitting on these guys' server. You know, what they're not telling us is what percentage of those accounts are actually active. Now, there are a lot of people who actively play this game. I know there are. The game is I've seen people act in very strange ways while playing that game. More than, and I'm a Magic the Gathering player. You know, it's a subculture of people that is known for being salty bastards. But this is far and beyond anything I've seen anyone by losing a match of Magic or losing a League of Legends game. You know, it's something I'm a little more familiar with, League of Legends.
Now, hold on one second. Let me just stop. Magic the Gathering players, are we the ones that came up with the whole table flip idea, or did that come from another game?
I believe that was originally a Yu-Gi-Oh player.
Okay.
I believe that was originally a Yu-Gi-Oh player, but we've definitely riffed on it a lot over the years, for sure.
On Twitch as well as YouTube, really just flipping out over this game.
It's intense. It gets you in your head, and you know you feel like things should break a certain way and they don't, and you know it's hard not to have some form of release based on it. But you know, really for me, my issue with Fortnite, and it's not necessarily any of those things. My issue is the cultural appropriation step. You know, the downloadable content where these people are paying between $1 and $5 a piece for their characters to do these dances. These dance moves are made up by rappers, you know, African American singers and rappers, dancers. Specifically, and these people are specifically taking these moves, programming them into their game. This is how Fortnite makes its money. It's a free to play game,
right?
So what you download, what you're paying for, is these after match dances and I'm assuming weapons and probably, you know,
yeah, it's all cosmetics.
But everything everything, you know, is in-game purchases for that stuff. So you got, you know, Snoop Dogg, 2 Milli, Block Boy, all these people have these really signature visuals that, you know, people who are fans of these rappers know these guys for these moves. And then, you know, this gaming company comes in, takes all of that, a bit of it, and these dudes are not seeing a dime for any of this. And that's a huge problem.
There's one rapper that's currently suing.
I hope they make it a class action lawsuit.
I saw the article. I think it was either last week or maybe the week before. And he's definitely filing a lawsuit. He's pretty pissed.
All should be. They all should be. These folks, and I don't know. Maybe Snoop doesn't care. He's seems to be pretty chill about most stuff. The dude's richer than God at this point, so I don't think maybe he doesn't have to care. But some of these other guys, these mid level, hip hop dudes, I think they could probably use the cash, and they definitely could use the appreciation of who did this. The practice of erasing people of color, our history of this nation, the entire history of this of Western culture altogether, and things like this need to stop because of that.
Fortnite's making a lot of money right now, a lot of money, like to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars per month, money, because these people are so obsessed with this game, and they're just dropping all kinds of money on it left and right. And yeah, I mean, I didn't think about, I saw the article of the one rapper that was suing, but it's not something I had put a lot of stock into, just because I don't play the game and I really don't know a whole lot about it, other than there's a lot of people playing it. But you're right, like, this stealing other people's dance moves and making that absurd amount of profit off of it is a damn shame. Especially that these rappers, like, some of these rappers are like that, they're like the one guy that I read the article on. I really wish I could remember his name, but he's more or less for like retired. Like, he just kind of, he was one of those like 1 or 2 hit wonder type dudes, and then his career just fell off. And yeah, he could use the money,
Absolutely.
But aside from that, they also just hit 8.3 million concurrent players at one time, which seems pretty crazy.
Absolutely. That's a whole lot of people, for sure. And there are people who really, a lot of people who are really putting a lot of time in.
I know you've got your beef
them.
with the game, which is what we just talked about. My beef is the way they marketed this game to children, with making it so cartoony. It really reminds me of the marketing strategies that the tobacco companies used to use back in like the 70s, maybe the 80s as well. I can't remember when the government put the clamp down on those marketing practices, but this is definitely that same strategy to get kids into the game and get them hooked. It's no different than tobacco, in my opinion.
Fair enough.
And as someone that was addicted to tobacco for a very long time, that kind of freaks me out a little bit. The next article, this kind of blew my mind a little bit. It probably shouldn't have, but Taylor Swift ensures UMG artists will profit from Spotify shares. So the deal with this, with what's going on here, is I don't know if anyone listening to this knows how record labels work, but they are essentially pimps, and it's kind of fucked up what they do. Like, they give you a contract, they give you some money to get started, and then you don't make any money until you've paid the record labels back. The record label will give you a lot of money. I mean, a lot of money. And these artists go into debt for decades before they're able to make any real profit. And Taylor Swift has gone out of her way to make, because what's been going on is a lot of these record companies are selling off their shares of Spotify. And some of the record companies are throwing money back to the artist, but they're taking their cut of what they essentially loaned out to the artist first, and then giving them what's left over. And Taylor Swift is making sure with her new record deal that UMG is not going to do that. John, what's your take on this?
Well, the record industry has been broken since its inception, but ever since the 40s, get into a multi-level marketing scam, pyramid schemes. So you sign a contract, and they're not giving you money. They're fronting you money. It's as innocent, you call it an interest-free loan. So on average, you get anywhere between $5,000 and $50,000 for a big contract for a big label where they think that you're going to be a huge performer or such. And then your ticket sales and your merch sales and your album sales, which now is, I guess, MP3 sales, not so much albums anymore, on new CD. And a percentage of that theoretically goes to you as the artist. Usually it's like 6 cents on the dollar, but until that forward money, that front money is paid off, that part goes to them as well. So if a download is, and you're getting 6 cents off the dollar, so 6 cents a download, and you owe $25,000, it doesn't take a math genius to figure out you're never going to get any money out of this. It's never going to happen. And who are younger, Taylor Swift is almost 10 years younger than me. People who have seen that, saw that all these people in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s get taken advantage of, and it's easier to see being taken advantage of because of media being what it is and because of the internet and social networking. These folks are not, they don't want to get trapped like that. And she's kind of the most vocal. There are other people who are doing similar things. She's the most vocal because she's, one of the most popular singers in the world. Everyone knows who Taylor Swift is. And so, her first step a couple years ago was she had everything she did taken off of Spotify. I don't know if you know anything out there about the metrics of Spotify, but anyone who is an artist, a vocal artist, any kind of music, any of that, knows that those folks are not getting much of anything. We're talking a penny for every 2 or 3 downloads. It's really, really low. So originally very loudly not allowing that to happen. Another who did something similar up until very recently, Garth Brooks actually didn't allow any of his stuff on any streaming services until I think a year ago, maybe 2 years ago. So that's well over a decade of streaming existing. Thank you. The model is not good enough for me. He eventually made a deal, I believe, with Amazon Prime, and then eventually with iTunes, where his stuff is available. The full catalog is available, but the smarter ones too. But also people like him, people like Taylor Swift, they're already rich. They can afford to look down the barrel of the gun, so to speak. Some of these, most of these smaller artists have the ability to do that.
Well, that's what I like about her move, honestly. She didn't have to do it. She went out of her way here to make sure those smaller artists that are signed to UMG are going to get a proper cut of money should they sell their shares of Spotify. And I think that was pretty huge. I wish more big artists would do that kind of thing. Would go out of their way to help smaller artists. Like in the past, it was all about, hey, you're a smaller artist, I like what you're doing. Why don't you come with me on tour and, you'll get some extra exposure. And that was pretty much it, right?
The power to do it at the time.
But yeah, that's fair. But it really feels like, the record industry they are masters of screwing people over as far as money goes. And the publishing industry for a long time was the same way. When you signed a book deal as a new writer, you wouldn't get any money. They would give you a $5,000 advance on your next book, and you wouldn't see any royalties until you had paid back that advance. And the advances and the royalties on a book are not far off from an album. You sell a book at the time, we're talking pre-Amazon here, you were looking at maybe $10, $12 for a book, maybe $20 for hardcover, and you were looking at maybe 4 to 5%. And Amazon kind of flipped that whole thing on its head, and a lot of people made a lot of money writing books and just going straight to Amazon with it. John, you and I are both writers. I don't know if you've ever tried to go the route of getting anything published. I have, and trying to find a literary agent as well as a publisher, is one of the hardest things you will ever do as a writer. And I actually got out of fiction writing because of the difficulty in finding an agent and finding a publisher, and also knowing that at the end of the day I wasn't going to make jack shit off of my effort, which in the case of writing a novel can take months or even years. Stephen King and George R.R. Martin, they don't have to worry about things like that. But to somebody who just wrote their first book, you definitely do have to worry about things like that. And there's nobody really out there taking care of writers. And for a long time, there was nobody taking care of musicians, really. And it's everyone thought they were rich and famous, and it's all an illusion. It's all smoke. See an artist doing what they can to help out.
Absolutely.
All right, you ready to move on?
Yes, sir.
All right, we've touched on this one before. You seem to think that a third standalone Deadpool would most likely happen, and I agreed with you at the time. But I found this on We Got This Covered, which is a popular website for movies and TV. And apparently Ryan Reynolds is saying there probably won't be a third Deadpool movie.
Well, I think that be willing to do one at PG-13, and I don't think that Ryan is.
Yeah.
I think that this new version, the PG-13 of Deadpool 2, I think he did it because there's some contractual obligation that we don't know about, and that's why he's doing it. I doubt that he's happy with it, and I doubt he's going to be willing to continue to do the standalone. Now, I think he does want to do the X-Men, the X-Force film. I don't think that's ever going to happen. I don't see that being a thing. I don't think those characters are popular enough to warrant a feature film. I'd like to see it. I think it'd be great, but I'm not going to hold my breath.
Well, we still don't really know how Disney's going to incorporate these characters into the MCU.
It's true.
And I think anything could happen, but yes, I think that the chances, Disney does not like putting out R-rated movies. I don't think I would watch a PG-13 Deadpool movie. I'm definitely not going to go see this one.
Disney absolutely makes R-rated movies. You'll just never know they're Disney. They have so many film houses that have the Disney name on them. If they want to make an R-rated film, they ship it over to one of their other cinema companies.
So basically what you're saying is if they did make a Deadpool 3, it would never have Disney's name on it.
Or it would be PG-13.
So, you're not going to see an MCU movie come out that doesn't have Disney's name on it at this point, though.
Probably not. Probably not.
And honestly, that kind of bothers me. And that's one of the reasons this article made it onto the list this week. Is because I really enjoy the Deadpool movies. I think when characters break the fourth wall, I think it can be done really well and it can be done really poorly. And I think they always did a really good job, both in the comic and in the movie, of breaking the fourth wall with that character.
Absolutely.
So my heart was a little heavy when I saw this. And I knew it would never happen, but I was always hoping that Hugh Jackman would come back and do a movie with Deadpool, because I think a Wolverine and a Deadpool movie would probably be one of the biggest selling superhero movies ever, in my opinion. And even if it didn't become one of the biggest selling, it would become a cult classic immediately, and people would be watching it for decades. We're going to move on to something really positive, probably the most positive thing that's coming out of the podcast this week. I saw this article and I just thought it was one of the coolest things I'd seen in a while. So there is a Norwegian cruise line. What is the name of this? Hurtigruten. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly. I'm a dumb redneck, so probably not. They are going to start using dead fish parts to power their cruise ships, and they're aiming to do this by 2021. They're going to use waste as combined with fish parts to create what's called biogas. And then they're going to liquefy it, and it's going to power their cruise ships. And they do a lot of like Arctic and subarctic cruises, and they're looking to reduce their carbon footprint because the Arctic regions are being hit the hardest by climate change at this point. This is I wish more companies were doing this kind of thing. I think it's just super cool. John, do you have any opinion on it?
I do feel like as time goes that you're going to see more and more utilization like this. I mean, we are theoretically eventually going through oil, assuming we don't blow ourselves up first. So there's going to be a need for things like biofuel. This is actually not a new idea. There have been multiple small startup companies, at least in the United States, in the last decade or so, that have changing gasoline cars to work off of certain different types of waste. A notable version is deep fat fryer used. Every fast food place and non-fast food place in America just about has got a gigantic vat of oil behind them. It's disgusting. So yeah, what's interesting to me about that, and I do hope that this cruise line goes through it with what they're doing and continues with this. The whole idea of biofuel in general is actually not new. For about a decade now, there have been small startup companies all across the states, at least, that have offered to change your gas or diesel powered vehicle over to used oil from deep vat fryers in fast food places. Every fast food place and most other restaurants have these large, disgusting containers behind them that is filled with the already used oil from deep. It's a way to repurpose that. The downside is, for those things at least, the smell is a real turn off. It doesn't smell like just a vehicle, it doesn't smell like fuel. You smell like you're combusting oil, and that is why I think that never took off. So these guys have got a way to do this without grossing out their clientele. Maybe it'll catch on and it'll be a good thing.
Yeah, I actually I worked at a farm to table restaurant for about a year, and one of the farmers would always collect our oil, and he would take it and turn it into biofuel. And I don't remember if he was running his personal vehicle off of it or if he was running some of his farming equipment off of it. But
probably the farming equipment. You don't have to care about smells when doing things like that. And that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it was a really cool idea, and he was a really cool guy in general.
People who adapt that kind of stuff tend to be neat people for sure. We're going to get into this a little bit more in the last segment of the episode. However, I do have to say that the older I get, the neater this kind of stuff appears to me. Like, I was never one of those. I was never very green, let's say that. But the older I get, when I meet people who are into this kind of stuff and doing something really innovative with it, like it really gets me going. I can just sit there and listen to them talk about it all day. Man, absolutely. I think that as you get older, you either become more caring or less caring about the things around you. I don't think there's a middle ground there. You're going to go one of two ways. Maybe you are going in that left direction more.
Well, it's not so much just completely going in one direction. It's that certain things I care about more, and there's other things I care about less. When you're a young man, especially when I was young, like I cared about the day. Like I cared about punching the clock, making a little bit of money, and then doing something to have a good time afterwards. Like I didn't care about what was going on in the rest of the world. I really didn't care about anything except what was happening in my life. And as I've gotten older, thankfully that has changed. Being a selfish little asshole is not something I wanted to carry into later adulthood.
Well, yeah, I mean, it leads to a really lonely old age.
Yeah, And it's funny because I'm the most alone I've ever been in my life, but I'm the least lonely. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
Absolutely.
But probably a topic for another conversation. Let's move on to the 1984 segment of today's podcast. Some interesting things. I found a couple of articles on Gizmodo. They were actually not the same article, but equally Orwellian here. The first is that British cops are building an AI that flags people for crimes that have not happened. Now, this isn't the thought police, but essentially what they're doing is they're profiling criminals. And they're profiling people who are associates of criminals. And they're basically watching you. And in China, in related news, they're coming out with a social ranking system, but apparently the social ranking system has been in place in some cities for a few years now. And so far, the social ranking system has kept 11 million people from flying and 4 million people from high-speed train travel. Now, how they're doing all of this is they're creating a credit score. And, you know, anything can hurt your credit, really, from, like, smoking in a non-smoking area can do that. Committing crimes can do it. All kinds of shit. Like, it's really, really ridiculous. And I understand why they're trying to reduce the potential for terrorism and other crimes that could cost a lot of innocent lives. I just don't think this is the way that they should do it. And what's going on in England is equally scary. You know, if you choose to associate with people who are a little seedy, you know, you could find yourself on some kind of watch list or interrogated, falsely accused of crimes, etc., thanks to this artificial intelligence. John, what are your thoughts on this matter?
Well, I mean, you got to think, this first article, it comes from England. England is the most under surveillance country in the world, with the exception of New Zealand. I believe that unless you live on a ranch somewhere, if you're in New Zealand, they've got, you know, they're watching you on camera right now. It's just what it is. But that they were the New Zealand since the early 90s. They were the kind of the guinea pig state for all these other, you know, countries doing these things. Mostly what you hear now is about Britain. There's more closed caption television going to government forces in Britain than I think probably anywhere.
I remember
as far as
seeing
per
that
capita goes.
in the movie. They mentioned that in the movie Green Street Hooligans, and I thought it was just fiction at the time. I thought it was, you know, just a movie thing.
That's a real thing. They have cameras everywhere, traffic cameras. The police typically are wired into any camera that any private business also would put in, and they're able to create some pretty amazing timelines on certain things when they put their minds to it. So, you know, to think that they've got computer programs that are now working towards looking at probabilities of recidivism is not even close to surprising to me. I mean, a case where a headline on an article is a little misleading.
Yeah, it's a little clickbaity.
Basically, the thought process for them is, before you're probably going to do it again. It's a way of looking at sociology, and that's what it is. And they are looking at type of sociology as being, you've done this before, you're just going to continue to do this. It leads more towards prison states, and that's the scary part for me. And honestly, we do it here in the States. It's just a smaller level. You know, I think that very, very little is looked into people, and this is taking a step away from rehabilitation, and I think that's a bad thing.
I 100% agree. I know a lot of people who've put in a lot of effort to changing their life once they've gotten out of prison or jail. And some people have had a lot of success, and some people have not, because of how difficult it is. Like, you know,
the odds are stacked against you.
Oh, 100%.
Most people who end up in jail, with the exception, with exceptions. There's white collar criminals, people who embezzle. Like you're probably, if you're gone for embezzlement, it's not external pressures that are causing this to happen. This is some decisions that you made. If you're a drug dealer, you're a drug dealer for a reason in America. And it's very likely that if you're a drug dealer, it's because other things have not worked for you.
Yes.
Life is. And you go to prison for that because, one of your customers gets pinched and they can't handle, 6 weeks in, so they roll on you and then you're done. And, you 6 to 10 years later, you're out. Well, what are you going to do? No one's going to hire you. They weren't hiring you then. They're not going to hire you now. So where are you going to go? How are you going to make your money?
You're going to go right back to doing what you were doing.
Is not there. We don't give people a shot in this country, and most Western nations don't. I can't speak as much for the East. I don't know as much about it, but as far as Western nations, for success, that's for sure.
I mean, that's a little off topic, but it doesn't change the fact that there's a lot of problems with how we look at crime and criminals. People deserve to have a second chance, and they deserve to be set up for success there. Like when you come out of jail or prison, you're set up for failure, not by yourself, but by the rest of the world, and that's really unfortunate. And I think having the thought police out there just waiting to bust you for a new crime is just absurd. This is the thing. Like, cops are paid to do a job, and I'm not hating on cops here. Their job is tough. But, they shouldn't be using artificial intelligence to do their jobs for them. We don't know enough about AI yet, in my opinion. And the technology really isn't there to start replacing police jobs and start allowing it to take over police work. At least that's my opinion on it. What's your view on what's going on in China, John?
I mean, I think that these things are pretty much go hand in hand. I mean, China takes a pretty authoritarian view of everything, most especially what they consider to be crime, and so their thought process is apparently, if you are have a predilection towards what they consider criminal behavior, they'll just so you can't go anywhere and do things past where you are. It's again not a way I would go with it, but it's unsurprising coming from.
I feel like this is just another way that governments are trying to shit on poor people and keep them isolated.
If they can't communicate, they can't revolt, right?
I mean, pretty much, yeah, but they can't even. I have been working very, very hard to make my life better, especially over the last several years, and it is, I'm a white male. Like, society is set up for me to have an easier time than everybody else. So if I'm having a hard as fuck time trying to go from poor to not poor, I can only imagine what everyone else, people of color and women are having to deal with when they try to do the same thing. This shit is about as close to fucking impossible as you can get. And the fact that these governments are going out of their way to isolate and trample down on poor people, especially poor people who've made mistakes that they've had to make to be able to survive, just seems absurd to me. Like, if you want to change things, you help people. You don't isolate them. You don't. I feel like China's essentially creating a caste system, like a 21st century caste system here, caste, however that word is supposed to be pronounced. And I think it's a scary thing. We're gonna move on to our last segment of the day, and possibly one of the most disturbing. For a lot of you who were Black Friday shopping after Thanksgiving, you may have missed this report. However, if you have used the internet since Black Friday, you have probably seen some, at the very least, some tidbits here and there about what's going on. A climate change report was recently released, and it was released on Black Friday. And we're not going to get political here. We're not gonna throw out reasons as to why it was released on Black Friday. But what we will talk about is what the report says. And the report basically says that we're fucked. We have an official timetable to reduce the temperature of this planet. We have until 2030 before things start getting really, really bad. And I don't know. I feel like we're at the point where there's a lot of people who are doing a lot of things to make the world a better place, but all of the rich people, like all of the people who have money and power and influence, they don't want things to change, and they're perfectly fine with continuing to line their pockets as this planet becomes less and less livable. And John, I'll let you throw in some opinions here.
Well, most of those people are very old. Assume, probably rightly, that they'll be dead before they... That's your thought process. Why would you not want things to stay the same? Thought process from their angle. Sure. Think that things will change for the better. And there's a strong possibility that it's too late to completely fix everything, but I think we can lessen the blow.
I'm just going to stop you right there because I want to point this out to our audience. This is hands down the most hopeful I've ever heard John sound about such a serious topic, and I think we need to just take a moment to just consider the fact of how hopeful John is that we can fix our planet, because I've never heard anything like this in my life. I'm surprised I even have words. So I'm just going to let you continue there.
That what we experienced, and attempting not to get too political, what we've experienced in the last 2 years should be considered nothing short of a wake-up call. Chance. And I think there's a way out of this. I think that if we can hold on as a people and not in the next 2 years and change some things, that we can get back on track. Until 2 years ago, we were much more on track to make things better. Things were slowly improving, and we can get to that again if we fucking think about it.
And that's my biggest problem with American society as a whole, is we're not doing a whole lot of thinking right now. I think the government definitely needs to pull their own weight when it comes to this, but I think as individuals, we all need to do something to start working on reducing our carbon footprints, This isn't an American problem. This isn't a Republican problem or a Democrat problem. This is a world problem. And we're going to have to, it's going to take the entire world working together to start making the kind of impact we need to make before the very horrific realities that this report predicts come to fruition. I think we're in dire shape, according to this report. If we don't fix this planet by 2030, the things that we have seen in the last few years are going to become so intense. It's going to become difficult for humans to survive, especially in the coastal cities and in areas that are closer to the equator. The heat's going to become unbearable. We're going to see a lot of power outages. We're going to see rises in disease, and third world nations. It's going to kill people. It's going to kill a lot of people. And as far as first world nations go, dealing with it is going to cost hundreds of billions of dollars. This isn't a joke. Like it's time we have to buckle down as the human race. We need to buckle down as a race, as a people, and we really need to start taking it to this problem, because we're the ones who caused it.
Absolutely. But to quote George Carlin, is not going anywhere. The planet will be fine. The humans are what's going away.
Yes. George Carlin said it's funny you bring up George Carlin, because he was a comedian, but man, did he have some interesting ideas. He said some really smart things over the years while he was on stage.
That's part of being a comedian. Comics who don't say socially relevant things, comics that don't make you think about things, aren't really comedians, in my opinion. You have to have there is. It's not just the oratory. There is a, I don't know how to put it. You have a responsibility. It's not just to make people laugh, but to make them think while they're laughing, and that's why I don't like comedy guys, for example. Those guys are just escapism. They just want to get their quick laugh in and get out. You know, they don't care about making you think. They don't want to make the world better. To me, that's not a stand-up comedian. George Carlin, Lenny Bruce, Richard Pryor, Sam Kinison, Bill Hicks, Joe Rogan. These guys just make you think about stuff. They're trying to make your world better if you just
You know what?
listen, think about it.
That's one of the reasons I enjoy this podcast so much. Like, when I first started the podcast, I didn't know if we were going to enjoy it. Like, you know, it was something you and I wanted to do for a while as individuals. But the more that we do this, the more I get to think about things, you know, because I'm constantly aggregating content that we're going to talk about here. And it has gotten me to thinking quite a bit. And I feel like, you know, we're both challenging not just each other, but also the people who listen to this podcast, and talking about, we talk about nerd culture, but we talk about things that are also important. We're not just talking about video games. We're not just talking about movies and film, or movies and TV. I used to shy away from these issues, and this podcast has, it's kind of making me blossom as a human to a degree, as far as my mind goes and what I'm willing to talk about publicly. And so far, I'm rather enjoying it.
Same.
But yes, people, like, we got to do something here. So when it comes time, you know, aside from, you know, we can all do little things. Like, we could all recycle more. John, do you have any personal ideas on how people can reduce their carbon footprint, or what they can do aside from voting for?
Personally, I don't own a car. You know, I live
That's a
in
good
city.
start.
If you live in a city and there is and you have mixture of public transportation, you have some number of friends, and sometimes you have to, you know, compensate the friends and cost to, you know, to use the public transportation. But overall, you know, the money that you spend doing that, number one, is probably less than cost of maintenance on the vehicle. Number two, less of a carbon footprint. You're not putting that, you know, near as much pollution out there. Now, it's not for everyone. If you have a family, it's you know, kind of impossible to make that work. But if you're a single person, or if you're a couple, you know, it's not, and you live in a good sized city, you know, more, then yes, that's a very viable thing. I've enjoyed it, and you know, it's if it was a hassle, maybe I would be less likely to live this way, but it's working out very well for me. I have other friends who are doing the same thing, also within the same size of a city. For people who don't have that possibility, you know, just the reusing paper. You know, don't throw something away after one use. Use it a couple of times. You know, as simple as using paper bags at the grocery store instead of plastic, you know, those things. Or even better, buy some canvas bags. You know, they cost $1 or $2 a piece, and it'll last you for years. You know, little things do add up, and it all matters. Everything matters.
For me, I'm really into the whole minimalism thing, and that includes electric usage. Like, I have a warmer apartment in the summer. I usually keep my apartment around 75, and I usually keep it around 67 to 68 in the winter. I keep my lights turned off unless, you know, I'm in the room using it. I always try to unplug devices I can unplug at night, because, you know, just because you turn something off, guys, you know, you're still going to be pulling in electricity if it's plugged in. And I just try to do my part that way. Just try to use the least amount of fossil fuels possible. That's really what it comes down to. The burning of fossil fuels is what's causing this immense amount of greenhouse gas. Also, people cause greenhouse gases. We breathe, right? And we breathe out carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas. What creates oxygen, which is what we need to breathe in, are plants. This is another thing that's going on. Like, the population of the world is increasing dramatically, but we're also doing a lot of deforestation. So there's way more carbon dioxide than there is oxygen. So plant some trees, people. Start a garden. Grow some herbs in your home. Have some house plants. Stuff like that. Just think, when people tell you to think green, they actually mean it literally. So we will see you next week for episode 4, and we'll have 10 more topics that have gone on in the last week that we'll be able to discuss and talk about. And until then, we hope you guys have a nice week. Take care of yourselves. Take care of your planet.